Okay, good afternoon. First of all, I think I'm looking at the folks who I can see, and I'm saying at least a stretch is in order. I'm looking at some folks right now that are struggling a little bit. So let me just, again, let's take 2 minutes to stretch a little bit. I'm gonna stretch myself. It's been great, but please stretch a little bit if you will. I appreciate that. And we'll get started right here momentarily. Okay, welcome back. Again, thank you. I'm excited about our next workshop session, conversation. We're going to sort of call it all the above. And we're trying to sort of look at this whole idea of how communities in crises can work better when they're faced with these things that oftentimes are unforeseen, and sometimes they are in fact are right in front of us, and they were telltale signs that oftentimes are right there and we don't in fact see them and receive them. So I am pleased to have with us a group of folks who've agreed to really give us their schedule this afternoon, and they've been so gracious with that. And so I'm going to thank them in advance for that. And I'm going to introduce our panel for the next session. I'm going to start, and I do see him on my screen. So I'm going to start with the Honorable Keith Ellison, who is the Minnesota Attorney General. He has served in that capacity since 2019, in January of 2019. As a people's lawyer, he is the chief advocate and practitioner of the law to ensure justice, safety, dignity, and respect for all of its citizens in the state of Minnesota. He counts as his core values equity and inclusion. His body of work includes consumer protection and litigation, public safety, and represents state agencies and boards and commissions throughout the state of Minnesota. He is a former member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 till 2019. Where he championed issues around consumer affairs, worker rights, and environmental and civil rights protection issues for all of us here in the United States of America. He also served some 16 years in the state of Minnesota's House of Representatives. And we actually know the Attorney General for two other reasons. And I'll make sure we remember there was an election for the nation's chairman of the Democratic Party, which he was a part of, as I recall. And then he served as the lead prosecutor in the matter of the May 2020 death of George Floyd. And his office, and he led the team of folks who were successful in the conviction of Derek Chauvin. And so again, Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you, sir. Next, I have Mr. Booker Hodges. And as I read more of his resume, it's actually Dr. Booker Hodges. He is the Assistant Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. He's a former police chief and law enforcement professional. For the past 5 years, I guess actually serving 5 years, he was actually president of the NAACP for the city of Minneapolis, the very first for a police officer, by the way, to hold that position and to serve in that capacity. He is currently president of the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives. It's also called and referred to often as NOBLE. And so we're glad that Dr. Hodges is here today. And next up is Spike Moss. Spike Moss is known as the mayor of North Minneapolis, serving that area some 60 years. He has been dedicated to the North Side and Black people, to be quite honest, but just direct. The theme for his work and his journey has been one love for our people. He's a former vice president of the City, Inc., and former executive director of the legendary The Way, Opportunity United, which provides, by the way, academic and entertainment and sports and cultural development for African-American youth and families. Always dedicated to African-American communities, where he is the founding, one of the founding members of United for Peace, and its role in actually bringing together gang violence, or gang summits, I should say, all over this country. And by the way, folks, that was the real lead up to the Million Man March that was called by Mr. Louis Farrakhan, where some 2 million African-American men gathered in Washington, D.C. He's also the host of a radio program. He co-hosts that with his colleague that I'm getting ready to introduce very shortly, Tyrone Terrell, called Voices of the African-American Community. He's also a board member with the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media. Always the advocate, always a fighter, always a foot soldier for justice, Mr. Spike Moss. And lastly, but not certainly least, is my brother, Tyrone Terrell. He is the current executive consultant with the firm Frazen Moore. He is founder and current president of the African American Leadership Council. He, along with Spike, were founders of the Men March, I should say, which stands for Men Are Responsible to Cultural Hope. Board member also of the National Coalition of Racism Against Sports and Media. He's a former director of the St. Paul Department of Human Rights and former deputy director of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. He's one of us, y'all. And so in that capacity, we certainly miss him in the more active role, at least at an agency, but he does all he can to support us. He is the co-radio host with Spike Moss of Voices of the African American Community. And he is often called on from local and state and national organizations to consult on a number of issues, including intervention prevention with gangs, survival-based youth activities, policing, human resources, equal opportunity, contract compliance. It goes on and on and on. His mantra, by the way, folks, is, in keeping with the teaching of Dr. King, in the end, it will be remembered. I'm sorry, let me make sure I get this exactly right. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Tyrone Terrell. So that's our panel for this afternoon, folks. I'm excited about this conversation. So
Jim, yes. Sorry to interrupt you. I just don't see Spike Moss. So if you're there, if you can put a reaction so I can bring you to the panel.
Jim, it's Tyrone. Spike will sign on in a couple minutes.
Very good. Thank you so
much. As soon as they come in, I will put in the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. So we'll get started. So what we're going to do to our audience is I have a series of questions that I'm going to pose to our guest, and I'm going to ask them to respond. And as you have questions, please raise those questions as we go through. We want this to really be an interactive opportunity for you to inquire of these experts about their experiences there in the Twin Cities area. The first question I want to kind of pose to my my guest is this one. What one thought or reflection can you share with us about May 25th, 2020, the time for which George Floyd was murdered in the streets of Minneapolis? What thought may you might have to offer us about that particular day, anything leading up to that day, or anything after that day? Attorney General Ellison, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Stowe, and thanks to everybody who's in part of this really critical conversation. So the thing that sticks with me is that the people who were walking by were just spending a warm afternoon, Memorial Day, and they happened to see a man they did not know under the knee of a armed agent of the state, Derek Chauvin. And they didn't know George Floyd. He was yelling and screaming. He was asking to breathe. He was compliant. He wasn't cursing them. He wasn't threatening them. And they heard his plea and they stopped to bear witness. And they didn't have anything they could do, but they whipped out their cell phones. And one girl, 17 years old, pulled out her cell phone, and that's the video that probably brought this matter to the world. But the thing is that, you know, if you're looking for a real life example of the Good Samaritan, you know, a real life example of people who don't know somebody, but who see that they're in desperate need of help and then rendered the best they could, you know, this is a wonderful example of that. You had one black 17-year-old girl, that was Darnella Frazier. You had two white 17-year-old girls. You had a 9-year-old black girl. You had a 65-year-old man who never had a chance to go to school, you know, only to the 3rd grade. That didn't stop him from stopping and rendering aid to the best he could, bearing witness. And you had a 31-year-old MMA fighter, a guy who knows how to handle himself in a ring, but, you know, he still was so restrained. He used verbal commands to try to save George Floyd's life, but he knew what he was watching. And you know, you had a firefighter, a person who was just out on a walk, but who was a member of the Minneapolis Fire Department, and she said, "Check his pulse, check his pulse." And you know, this bouquet of humanity stepped forward to say what they saw. And then the next thing is that, you know, we all talk about the blue wall, how police officers are the thickest, most tight fraternity in America. Well, at our trial, which happened months later, you know, that blue wall cracked when the Chief Madera Arredondo said, "This is completely unacceptable." By the way, shortly after this event, the tragic occurrence, he fired the 4 officers. And then several officers came in and said, they testified against their colleagues, which is something that it doesn't happen every day. So there are many more remarkable things to talk about, but those are 2.
Thank you so much. Booker.
Before I get started, I have to mess with Tyrone because he doesn't have on all black today, and that's not something normal for him.
I did have a black shirt on earlier, Booker.
Okay.
I spilled something, so I had to change shirts. But yes, I'm out of uniform, Booker. I'm out of uniform.
I know. I've never seen this brother on with anything white, including socks. So yeah, that's just our joke here in Minnesota. So I've had a lot of time to think about this. So my thoughts on it are this. What I witnessed was the failure of multiple systems meeting on a street corner and the calamity that resulted in that. You had failure of a system where you had an officer who had multiple complaints, but even take the complaints off the table, you had an officer whose body language indicated that he just did not want to be at work, or he should not be on the street. Right? You had that system that allowed him to go out to work. You also had a system where you have a brother like George Floyd, who for all practical purposes has a family that cares about him. What systems failed for him to end up in that situation where you're in a store passing a counterfeit $20 bill, right? And that's a discussion that I would like to have at some point moving forward, is just that calamity for multiple system failures meeting at the same time on a street corner. And we're still dealing with that.
Thank you. Tyrone.
Well, brother, I just reflect back on getting a phone call from Chief Arredondo informing me what happened and the need for us to meet the next morning at 8 a.m. And it was gut-wrenching to hear about it, see it. But what was interesting in that meeting at 8 o'clock the next morning, there was about 25 of us in that meeting, including Brother Spike. And for the chief to stand up and say he's going to terminate all 4 officers immediately, and to have the Mayor Fry, back him on that decision. Too often in these situations, the mayors don't back a chief, and particularly a African-American or a chief of color. And so it was about now how do we protect community? And so to leave there and go out to 38 in Chicago and a man lost his life. He lost his life. And I just told a group this morning, there is no restitution for that murder. George Floyd will never, ever pick up his daughter, hug his mother, his family, his friends. And so that's what sticks in my mind is just getting that call that another Black man in a senseless killing, in a cowardly killing of a Black man.
Which one?
There had been a series of
Him?
shootings and that occurred in St. Paul, as well as also into the other area as well of Minneapolis. Were there signs, folks? I mean, could we have predicted this? Maybe not this very specific situation or circumstance, but could this have been something for which one could have foreseen just based upon the earlier interactions that would have occurred in St. Paul and also in Minneapolis involving police-related shootings?
Well, you know,
Right.
this is Keith here. This is
Yes,
Keith.
sir.
Let me tell you. So the great sociologist named Kenneth Clark, and many of y'all will know Kenneth Clark because he gave the factual basis for Thurgood Marshall to be able to challenge segregation in schools. Well, that was 54. So push the tape forward. 14 years later, he's testifying in front of the Kerner Commission, which is studying civil unrest throughout the country. And he gives what is basically this quote. He says, you know, when I read the investigative report from the 1919 Chicago riot,
Wow.
which started because of a very negative, tragic interaction between police and Black community, I could have been reading the investigative report of the 1935 Harlem riot, or the 1943 Harlem riot, or the McCone Commission report, which is from the LA Watts riot. He said, it's as if it's an Alice in Wonderland cycle that plays and repeats over and over again with the same inaction. That's Kenneth Clark. So read him. He'll tell you back in '68 that, you know, of course there were signs. There's signs all over America. You know, I was talking to a judge in Dade County just yesterday about how we improve police community relations for the people who are suffering mental health crisis. And he and I were talking about the McDuffie so-called riots in Miami. And even before that, you know, you all heard Trump talk about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Trump is not creative enough to come up with that. That was a guy named Walter Headley, who was the police chief in '68 in Miami. It's all over the country. This is a national phenomenon, and Minneapolis and St. Paul we're just part of America, quite frankly. And so, yeah, you know, it was predictable. I remember me and actually Spike and Tyrone were leading the community back when I first started working on stuff when I moved here from Detroit. Lillian Weiss and Lloyd Smalley, a 68 and a 71-year-old senior citizens, a botched drug raid, flashbang grenade kills them. And then there was Tysel Nelson when I was my first year out of law school, 1991, one of the first cases I ever got, where I represented Miss Earlene Skinner, the son who was killed. That's 91. And then, you know, on up through the years. And, you know, so it was entirely predictable. The only question is, are we sick of it? There are a number of things we could and should do to make lasting and meaningful change, but we've paid out $70 million in civil rights cases, Section 1983 cases in Minneapolis. We lost 500 buildings on Lake Street due to civil unrest. There are a lot of people who, I mean, of course we lost George Floyd's life. And we also lost something that's also equally precious, which is the confidence that 9-year-old Judea Reynolds had in her government. as she was standing there watching this murder happen, this 9-year-old girl who will one day be 19 and 29, when she's a mom and she has a 9-year-old herself, she will have to say, when I was 9 on the corner of 38th and Chicago, I saw a man murdered. And has society done anything different to make sure there won't be another one? Yeah, it's preventable and predictable.
Hey, Jim, Brother
Yes.
Spike just joined us.
Very good, very good. Okay, Spike, how are you, sir? Spike, you there?
He's technologically challenged, brother. Turn your mic on, brother.
Is he there?
It's a label turning point instead of Spike Mouse. Is that him? Okay,
Yeah,
Turning
Spike
point. Yeah,
Moss.
that's him.
great, excellent.
Okay, there he is. Okay, very good.
That's the volume.
There you go.
Yeah, we can hear you, Spike. How are
You
you,
can hear me
sir?
now? All
Yes,
right,
sir.
how are you doing?
Doing great, doing great. Spike, welcome. Jim Stowe, we've met on a couple of occasions there in the Twin Cities. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon, and you're joined by your colleagues. And I'd ask an initial question about any thoughts that they may have had post May 25th, either leading up to May 25th or after May 25th. You want to just add any thought you might have at all? Any reflection about that day, or again, the time leading up to or time after?
Well, you know, for me, this problem goes back to 1966 when I witnessed the police whoop a Black 14-year-old girl in downtown Minneapolis in broad daylight and get away with it. I fought these cases ever since 1966, as well as civil rights and human rights. And when Tyrone was a young man, he joined me, he protested, he marched. When Keith was a young man, he joined me, protest, we marched. And all of us wanted change for the better. And I will dare say all of us wanted police to go to jail back then. Keith finally got the first victory out of my 56 years of fighting police brutality. It took that long. And I would say in front of Keith, and Keith knows it to be true, in many a case, he had the proof. He had the witnesses. He just couldn't win because of racism. And it has not changed. Even in the case that's coming up for Mr. Wright in Brooklyn Park, it's an all-white jury with one Asian and one Black. We can only hope that all those whites are not racist for this man's case to even be close to fair. Right now, it looks like it's more of the same. You know, when we got in this battle, which Keith will tell you, to defund the police, I don't think any of us disagree with that. We just can't do it now because of the crime. But I bet you Keith or Tyrone believe we can straighten these people out in a year or 5 years or run the racism out of them. I don't believe it's possible in Minnesota because before I stood up in 1966, they were constantly taking Black men under the bridge on Broadway in Plymouth and beating them senseless. And after that, 70s, they began to shoot us. And they have not stopped beating and shooting us at will, and no one goes to jail. We have a chance now with Keith, but it depends on how many videotapes Keith can get, because if you have to trust them to do right, they're not going to do right.
So what about the community, folks? I mean, was the community really prepared? I know that from your all's perspective, certainly Spike, you and Tyrone are more directly maybe involved, and don't mean to discount what you do as well, Booker, and also Keith. But the role of the community, what was their reaction? And was there a more aggressive kind of way to kind of deal with this than maybe what you thought happened? Any reaction to my question?
Well, I think the community was outraged immediately. I mean, there were hundreds and then thousands of people who came out. I mean, I tell chiefs all the time that their boss is not the mayor, it's not the city council, it's not community leaders, but one officer becomes their boss when they make a senseless decision to murder an innocent person. And we have a saying in St. Paul on our police cars, trusted service with respect. And I often even tell the chief, but it should say for white people, because too often Black people and other people of color don't get policing with trusted service with respect. And so if police officers ever learn to value the humanity of a Black person, then these senseless murders would go away. But there are too many police officers, and not just police officers, it's in every level of government. Just that a police officer ends up taking a life. But there are many parts of our government, these different government departments. I often tell people the most racist people are in your human resources department. They are the ones that make the most racist decisions. They decide to put your resume, if your last name is Muhammad, not qualified. Or if your name is Anderson or some name they like, you become qualified. And so the community was outraged, and we will continue to be outraged because this is not over. This is not over.
Keith, to the point you raised a minute ago about this whole idea that I think you said some 500 structures were destroyed and so forth. And so folks who are watching that who don't live in the Twin Cities areas, we're seeing this, you know, destruction of property and looting and so forth. And the question that a lot of people ask is, you know, was this a responsible response from the community? Can you react to that? Either you or Booker, you react to that, and then I'm asked also the folks from the community. Your thoughts?
You know what? I'll just quote John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy said, when nonviolent means of social change are made impossible, violent change is made inevitable. It's not anything that I want to be true. It just is true. You know, and people outraged will do outrageous things. And that's not an endorsement, right? I mean, I wish everybody would, you know, call up me, and we'll file a lawsuit, and we'll pursue our interests in court, and we'll follow the rules of evidence, and everything will be very civilized. But it's just not the way human beings are wired. You know, you lean on somebody too hard for too long, and you get this. And I think that civil unrest has got to be built in as a feature of unredressed excessive force over time, right? If you don't deal with it, you're going to get this. Just like if you don't deal with your excessive force problem, you're going to get sued, and you're going to have to pay a lot of money, and you're not going to be able to, you're going to have to divert money from potholes and lights and playgrounds into police misconduct lawsuits. You're also going to have to just schedule it every few years. You're going to have what we used to call riots. Now they call civil unrest. Some people call rebellion. You know, I know, you know, but we also, you're going to have other problems. I mean, you're going to have a recruitment problem in your police department, because here's a crisis that people have really got to plug into. Because I do believe that most officers who join the force do it because they want to help people. I think most of them go in with good intentions. And right now you got a real recruiting problem, and you got a lot of officers with PTSD. PTSD is when the cortisol due to stress overloads your brain. And they got so many officers on PTSD leave right now, the force is maybe down 200, 150 people. You cannot keep this kind of thing. We've got to do some reform measures to do some things. Now, you know, like you take George Floyd, I'm gonna tell you this. I mean, I doubt anybody in this country knows more about the case than me. I was the lead prosecutor on it. We still got 3 more we got to prosecute. There's no evidence that George Floyd ever knew that was a fake 20. Not one shred of evidence that we ever found that he knew that. He didn't say, "Oh yeah, my bad." Nothing. There's no facts to that degree. From far as we know, he got past a bad 20 because he had some legit 5 other bills in his pocket, right? Now, if this would have happened anywhere else in the city, Twin Cities, they'd have been like, "Oh, sir, this 20 does not look to be legitimate. What are we going to do about it?" Well, he got a different response because of who he was. But, you know, quite honestly, I have to, because I'm a man of law, right? I cannot condone burning a building and breaking a window. I have to say that's wrong. But I'm not so naive that I think that just condemning it is sufficient. What if we eliminated the conditions that bring it about?
You know, Keith, to add to it, a part that people miss, we live in a state where they didn't give the Civil Rights Department any teeth. They didn't give the Human Rights Department any teeth. You didn't have a city council that would fire, suspend any police. You didn't have a city council or a mayor that would order the Hennepin County attorney to charge a policeman. So for over 150 years, we never saw any of them go to jail till you sent one to jail, Keith. That's how bad it is. So when it comes to the question of rebellion, I want everybody to understand Minnesota is the only state. Up until Floyd died, they had 6 rebellions. No other state had 6 rebellions. When Floyd died, we had 3 more, University, Lake Street, and North Minneapolis. We're now the only state with 9 rebellions. So that tells you what's wrong with Minnesota and the level of hate in Minnesota, that no officer until Keith sent one to jail and prison, it ever happened.
Well, do reforms work? I mean, Booker, is that realistic to think about, that we can, first of all, we can even do that, number one, and number two, will it work?
So I'm going to go back just a second. I mean, obviously, I understand people's pains, but what took place during the civil unrest or riots, whatever you call it, I can't excuse that. Especially, you know, what happened, a lot of this was a lot of white folks came in and started the fires that burned down a lot of our buildings, right? And then what's left, and I teach on riots and civil unrest, what's left, we never recuperate from that. And I get, you know, the pain and everything, but we got to think about that. So reform, you know, do reforms work? I say yes, under the right circumstances. And the right circumstances are, as police departments and community need to get into alignment with each other in terms of values, right? The cops, police departments never ask communities what type of police officers they want, right? And what values are they going to have the police department enforce, right? There are substantive things that I believe could be done to get police departments in alignment. But the problem with these discussions, even those of us who are involved in the community, we don't get asked. I mean, we don't get asked flat out. I mean, it's just like, you know, and I used to be an activist before I was a cop. I've been studying this. I've been doing this for 20 something years. We don't get asked what would need to be done. In Minnesota, we got 5 black chiefs. In 2 years, we're going to be down to 1 or 2 unless something happens, right? And you talk about the recruiting problem, and I say this all the time in the communities. How long are you going to depend on other people for your security? We depend on other people for our food, but how long are you going to depend on other people for your security and start to join these police departments? So there are substantial police department, the substantial reforms that can work. And I'm just going to go into a couple of examples, right? Civilian review authority has never worked. I know people don't want to hear that, but you can't find an example where that's worked. One thing that you could do to a police department right now that will start reforms is remove internal affairs from the police department. You take internal affairs out of the police department, and you place it within the city, and they have lawyers that investigate these crimes. One, that's going to take away any argument about employment, data privacy pieces that normally come into play when you talk about civilian review authority, because people don't have that. 2, you actively supervise officers. One thing that you notice about when George Floyd was murdered, a supervisor never came out there the entire time that incident took place. Now, police officers were responsible, but all people need supervision, right? So when you go into a police department, the first thing the new chief needs to do is really focus on them frontline supervisors and make sure that they are in alignment with the values of the department. Because a lot of times what you're going to find, and I'll be quiet here, you'll get a charismatic chief that everybody likes, goes, shakes everybody's hands and smiles, and says my department is messed up, and they're in charge. And the reason that is because whenever you see that, that's a chief that's not connected to their frontline supervisors, and their frontline supervisors haven't bought in to what he or she wants to do.
Tyrone and Spike, when we hear, and actually Spike, you mentioned this a minute ago in your comment about defunding police, and that you had a strategy that within 5 years, I think you said a minute ago, that you could move the cities to a different place. So when you hear Well, when you talk about defunding police, what does that mean in terms of how that plays out? What does that look like if you were to follow through on that? And is there not a need for police?
Well, Jim, there's definitely a need for good policing. I would never support defunding the police, but transformation in our departments, transparency in our department, and the thing that Booker talked about in terms of having a connection to the community. We should have a say in our policing. And so without that, it's gonna happen again. When you talked about the burning of the buildings and all that, one of my other favorite Dr. King quotes is, "A riot is the language of the unheard." So a lot of that burning and stuff and looting, and not the looters, because there's folks that were stealing televisions and breaking in stores. They weren't protesting. Those people were committing crimes, looting, robbing, but most of them don't ever take into consideration the impact it has on community, because many of those stores, many of those buildings will not be rebuilt. And so policing is important. Our community, Black people are the most criminalized people in America. And we need to be protected. We need protection, but we want good policing. We don't want bad cops, regardless of color. Okay, bad cops just don't come in white. I get more complaints in St. Paul from the community regarding Asian among officers than even white officers. So bad cops just don't come in white. And so it takes a strong chief to be able to lead a department and weed out those bad cops. And I agree totally with Booker that one step is to remove IA from the department, make it a separate institution that can now investigate and bring forth charges against bad cops. And so we just need good policing, period.
And this is Keith again. I would say that there's a few things. First of all, there's examples, right? I mean, if you look at, Miami-Dade, they've done some very good things in terms of officer-involved deaths involving people with mental health crisis. But they didn't just do something with the officers. They did something with the courts. They set up a mental health diversion court, which means that so what's the officer supposed to do when they come make this arrest? Take them to jail? Well, you got somebody schizophrenic. We need the mental health diversion court has done wonders. And like when we study this issue and Booker and I worked on this task force along with his supervisor, John Harrington, and we found as many as half of the officer involved shootings were people in a mental health crisis. So we've got to deal with it that way as well. But there are examples. Miami-Dade court, I think, is a good example. And then Camden, New Jersey has done some good things. And right now, Austin, Texas is moving forward on some things. I think that we've got to be able to try some things. But what's really going on, my analysis is that the current existing model for policing was created during the Jim Crow era, and therefore is well suited to preserving a racial hierarchy, but not well suited to meet the needs of modern life in a multiracial democracy. And so we've got to convert the institution. And I think, Booker's idea about taking IA out is good. I'll say there's two things that I think will change policing dramatically. One, you must prosecute criminals, whether they have badges or not. And two, when you have bad cops, you need to use administrative discipline up into including firing to deal with them. Because I'm gonna tell you who I think, Booker's a cop, he could tell you, but I think a lot of cops will be happy about it, because I think most people join the police department who they don't want to work next to the thumper and the thug and the racist. They want to come in and do a job and help people. But they're in a job. I mean, you know how many officers I've met who said, I never shot my gun. And then you got some who shoot it every weekend. There is a real serious thing, but we've got to find a way to criminally charge the ones who commit crimes and then deal with administrative discipline. And I think you will have a reversal in the recruiting crisis. And people will want to be, I mean, I'll set up right here, but I got a son who is spent 5 years in the United States Army. Very proud of him. He's a medic. He's a nurse. He knows emergency medicine pretty well. I said, son, why don't you think about joining the police department? He said, man, my dad don't want, I don't want to do that, Dad. That's not what I want to do. I'm going to go into something else. But, he'd be a great police officer, but I can't even get him to think about it. And it's because he doesn't want to be associated with what the institution's associated with. So I think that we've got to embrace reform. We got to embrace it in a firm way. And the time is absolutely now.
Well, accountability is an issue that goes back, and Booker had said early on that he didn't think that police review boards, some people call them oversight commissions, and a number of different areas. Spike, would you agree that they are, well, what do you think? Do they work?
Well, they hit on a lot of points that matter. Like when Keith was talking about the mental illness, I served on the US Justice Department mandated police mediation for 7 years. And one of the first things we learned is the doctor who deals with mental illness certified almost every white person that had it to be a Minneapolis police officer. And Black people who had no problems, he scratched them right here in Minneapolis. Not yesterday, right now. The other thing Keith said that is really, really important that I've talked about for the last 20 years. If Spike Moss robs somebody, shoots or kills somebody, I go to court, I get a bail, I get charged, I get found guilty, I go to prison. Stop lifting the police above the law. Break the law, they commit murder, they need to go to jail like everybody else. You know yourself, Keith, we caught our officers in Northeast Minneapolis selling dope out the squad car. Do you know where they're at? You know yourself, Keith. When Mormon was a police officer, he would knock on the doors of Black women's homes in North Minneapolis, say he was a police in his uniform. They let him in and he raped them. All these fools became police because of the mentality and comfort with racism. I don't care what's ever else wrong with you. As long as you're racist, you can be a Minneapolis police officer. So I would say to Booker and you, because we're gonna need y'all's help, we gotta make those people over at the Capitol vote to stop putting police above the law. Our people are in prisons all over America for everything they do, and they see you breaking the law every day with a badge. It's not fair, and we need to stop it now. As far as all these other groups they got to look at police, they're usually handpicked and they don't go nowhere. So when you look at the man that killed Floyd, what's he still doing there with 18 charges? Let me give you one more that Tyrone and you probably both know. In Minneapolis alone, you got officers with 50 to 60 charges in their little jacket in the file, ain't never been suspended, never been fired, still police. You also got police with as many cases and as much murder who retired with full pension. So we need to stop all that type of madness and get serious because they create the policies that protect themselves. We need to go at them policies, like making citizens pay for their insurance policy. Let them pay for their own, because when they get sued enough and lose that insurance, they lose that shield. We need them to lose that shield if we can't remove them no other way. So we got to put things in place where there's consequences for their actions, like it would be for all of us. Let them go to jail like everyone else when they do wrong. And I agree with you, Tyrone. We need good policing. We don't need racist policing. But the only reason we need it is because America is a lawless society. From every level, Keith, you know from being in Washington, they don't vote for the things they should vote to protect the people. It's a lawless society where you would never slaughter the Indians, stole all the land. You'd never stole me and made me a hostage for 400 years. It's a lawless society. So we want to come at this lawless society with the law that they put on us. We want it on them. I think that's fair. And I think we're overdue as men to think that way, to protect. I knew when you first said police, defund the police, I knew why you said it, Keith. It's all those years of fighting against police brutality. And you were right. We just can't get past the lawbreakers. but you definitely right, because most of them can't be saved. Most of them won't stop beating and shooting and killing. And they frankly don't care if it's a girl, a woman, or a child. So whatever we do, as we move forward here in Minnesota, we move to put the charges on the police, is all I'm saying.
You got folks on.
If I may,
please,
if I could
go
just
ahead,
say
please.
this.
Yes, please.
So I would say that the term defund the police was never intended literally. Not
Let it stand.
well. So what I mean by this, though, Spike, is that we won't fund mental health. We won't fund healthcare. We won't fund housing. We got people living in tents on the roadside, right? Do we not? We do.
Homeless.
And we won't fund all these institutions that can keep people safe and secure.
And a job.
But we will fund prisons and prisons. So my thought is, let's refund the community, right? Let's put investments in place so that, because you got a police officer going through a homeless encampment, clearing people out. I mean, what if we just got the folks somewhere to live? I mean, what about that? And people complain, oh, they peeing on the roadside. Well, if you ain't got nowhere to pee, you're gonna pee where you can pee. So I'm saying that we have not invested in the things that keep people safe and decent and in a good shape. And so, and we just will enforce the tough stuff, the hard fist, right? And we ain't sparing no expenses for building more jails and prisons. But let's put some money into human needs. And then, you know what? Your crime problem will go down.
I'm going to make sure that my colleagues on the airways across this program have a chance to sort of weigh in. If there's somebody out there that has a particular question or concern, please feel free to raise that to our very gifted panel here today. I know one thing that's out there is this idea about those of us who are in organizations. We're in human rights organizations. We're in the government organizations that do the work of human rights. And Spike, you said early on that a lot of the issues you had initially with Minnesota was the fact that they had no teeth in their particular laws. But for those of us on this call in this program this afternoon, Tyrone, let me start with you. What can we do? Our situation, our circumstance. We have some restrictions. Sometimes we don't. Some freedom, some flexibility. What should we be doing?
Well, let me say this before I say it. I love IAOHRA. I love my human rights agencies across America. I love the Sisters and Brothers in Nairo. But I'll just use Minneapolis and St. Paul. There was not one word came from our human rights officials, unless I missed it. So Booker, Keith, Spike, that came out and said anything, that didn't come to the community to address the pain in our communities. I truly believe that civil and human rights organizations need to be at the forefront. You should be standing right next to the mayors and the governors when this stuff happens. And so again, I'm going to speak for Minneapolis and St. Paul. It didn't happen.
That's right.
An old newspaper guy here did a survey about 5 years ago and said, tell me who the human rights director is. I haven't been in human rights work since 2008. And 100 of the people said it was me. 10 or 15 of them said it was Spike Moss. And Spike has never been with a government agency. But when our people are so invisible in these jobs, we need you to stand up. You should be at the forefront of this conversation. You should not be on the sideline. Get in the game. Because we need you more than ever to hold the mayors, the governors, the chiefs of police accountable. City council. And so that would be my comment, Jim, is that we need our agencies to step up and be heard and get the support that you need. But you can't stand on the sideline and do nothing.
I would like to request that two of the gentlemen here with me in Turning Point want to ask a question whenever.
Yes. Please go ahead.
All right, let me put the first one on.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Spike.
how does one go about getting internal affairs out of the police department, which seems to be a gigantic good old boy club?
Did you hear it?
Right. They need to come closer to the mic. Come up by
So
you.
I heard them. So I can tell you, what we
Okay.
do at the Minnesota
Be
Department
sure
of
that
Public
you hear
Safety.
it.
Yeah, what we do at the Minnesota Department of Public Safety is, it's in our policy that internal affairs is separate from the 3 law enforcement agencies I oversee. So if you got a complaint against a Minnesota State Trooper or a BCA agent or alcohol and gambling enforcement officer, you don't file those complaints with the agency. You file them with the Department of Public Safety. And separate within that, the internal affairs folks, and they report directly to the commissioner, they investigate all that, and they're lawyers, and they're trained to do those investigations. Because at the end of the day, an internal affairs investigation is just that. It's an investigation. Now, the agency still decides to discipline, right? But it's harder to sweep something up under the rug or not issue proper discipline when that investigation is independent of the agency doing that. Now, if you ask how you can do that, it's just a matter in most cases proposing, because most police departments do not have where IA exists in their contracts. So like your union contracts, most union contracts don't have IA will specifically be rested within the police department. That's just kind of where it's always been for folks. So, I mean, it's just a matter of proposing that change. Now, I'm not saying it's that easy. I mean, people are going to fight it, but it's depending on where you're at.
Did the rest of y'all hear his question?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Go ahead and say it again.
And there, I know a lot of police department officers, even from way back in the early 70s, and there seems to be this invisible good old boy club, hush hush, where stuff happens and everybody just shuts their mouth.
Who wants to respond?
Well, I think he's right. The good old boy club does exist in policing. But again, it's in every unit of government. See, police gets too much attention. It's in public works. I'm dealing with 7 black males right now from our public works department who are being treated like almost damn near slaves. And so, so it's not just police. We have a whole culture that is full of racism and prejudice and discrimination that has to be addressed. I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. Your HR departments are the most racist department in your institutions, but nobody holds them accountable.
But I mean, how can you reform something that would be productive and not just be renamed and remain the same?
So I'm going to address what he's talking about here. So, this good old boys network, as human beings, naturally, our brains, we have the bias to favor the self, and we have that natural ability innately in us to do us versus them, right? People forget when the people of Israel went into the promised land, they went in as 12 separate tribes, right? We seem to forget that, but we have that nature to do us versus them. So how do you break that up? And where I've seen that been successful, I've seen that be successful when you have departments that are reflective of the communities they serve. So like in Minnesota, like, when my boss, Commissioner Harrington, was in charge of the Met Transit Police Department, he had a significant amount of minorities on it. So now you eliminate that good old boys network because the power structure is taken down and you got officers who are different backgrounds and won't subscribe to some of the other behaviors that people do. But whenever you have a homogeneous police department, these types of things are going to be that harder to disrupt.
Let me bring the second one up.
I got a colleague here, I think wants to chime in real quick.
Sure, right here.
Sabrina, is that you, Sabrina? Go and unmute and please, you have to unmute, go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
someone else is talking.
Hold on a second, we'll be right with you. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm Sabrina Mass. I'm the Public Relations Officer for the Human Relations Commission here in Mobile, Alabama. And we do have a strong Human Relations Commission, and we also have a very strong Police Review Commission here, appointed by the mayor and the city council. However, I would like to say that in the past, those were committees that were formed, but they were not very utilized. But I would say to Mr. Keith and the panelists, it's sad to say that the George Floyd incident, believe it or not, it shook up not only the nation, but it shook up this city in Mobile, Alabama. And actually, after the George Floyd incident, Mobile, Alabama had the biggest protest of citizens than they have ever had in history in this city and the state of Alabama. So being that we had been for many years, for 17 years, I've been active with the mayor and the city council, the chief of police, the different leaders in this city, pushing to get change and whatever we need to do to make our city safe and be heard. So I would say this, it's just crazy that after the George Floyd incident, and I have to thank Mr. Keith, and accolades, because that was a very emotional time for everybody in this nation. And it was, of course, we've had incidents in the past that were, just as bad, but for some reason, this situation, it just came and rose above, to everybody's heart and soul. And, so that being said, there have been many changes in this city just because of that incident, where in the past we were demanding that the police wear body cams mandatory, and it never happened. So since that situation with Mr. Floyd, that has changed with the policy here, because we demanded it. Like, no, this is, and when I say we demanded it, I mean the city council auditorium for months after the incident were packed with minority citizens demanding change, demanding to see, we wanted transparency to see the police, the books. We want to see how they handle these situations. The chokehold was a big issue here, which has changed. Also, it's now in this city that's illegal. We do have at the time we had a chief of police which is a Black man, and I will say he's phenomenal, which he has moved up to the director of police at this point, and he has named a new chief under him, and they have gotten rid of fired police since the George Floyd incident, and gotten rid of them, brought in new recruits, and they have been really changing and shifting. And not only that, the citizens of this community have gotten totally engaged and involved. They're demanding change. We mean it. We're not playing about it. And so I would say it's crazy. Like, I've been trying to do this with other civil rights and community activists for 17 years. And just this one incident, just that quick, it just shifted the whole dynamic of what we have been asking for many years. And so this city, I would honestly say, and we are in the deep South, Alabama, it just amazes me how it has changed with just the incident, and sometimes I just can't believe it, but the city is calm. The police they engage with the community now. They have changed policies. They actually have programs now that they're going into the underprivileged communities, where the citizens now are building relationships with the police officers. The mayor, this is a third-term mayor in this city, where in the beginning we knew he wasn't for the people, but now he is like just really putting money into the communities, going into the Black communities. His whole demeanor has shifted. And I just want to say, really honestly, that God bless, Mr. Floyd's soul and his family and the tragedy that happened. But Mr. Keith, I would say, thank you for your hard work and just, putting the paving the way out there for changes have happened in the South, from Alabama to Georgia to Texas, because I'm a native Texan. For some reason, it seemed like that incident changed the South. Now the North seemed like it shifted, some strange things going on that way, but the South has changed as far as the political views and the police and the citizen involvement. It's just amazing. So I have to say, honestly, that is what is going on right now. And I just want to thank the panelists, each and every one of them, for their hard work, although we're in the South, believe it or not, we keep up with what you guys are doing. We keep up with you guys, whatever you have going, just like today. We are keeping up with it because we're chiming in on you educating us on how to present these things to the people that are leading this city from what you are educating us with. So do not think that your work and your words are not going unheard. I promise you, they are. And that's why we are here from the Mobile, Alabama, the Human Relations Commission, on this, in this conversation today, because we have been looking forward to this conversation for like a month. Like we have been like so excited. The mayor, he knows about it. They're watching. The city council, the Director Batiste, the director of the police, and Chief Prine. So they're engaging as well on this. They may not speak today, but they are engaging. And so I just really want to say thank you guys and for lifting some of the burden off and helping us change the factors that were existing in this city. So thank you so much.
Second question ready. Second question ready. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Maurice and I'm from Chicago. And they label our city as Chirac. And I'm a senior. So I'm thinking about coming here to migrate, but listening to the conversations that I'm hearing and information, I'm wondering if I'm going to be safe here. Because we consider the officers in Chicago, because they have this logo on their car saying we protect and serve. I don't know if it's on the cars here.
They took it off.
Okay, but we look at them as gangs, not officers. Because like he was saying, they put themselves above the law. So they feel like I could walk down in my neighborhood and it could be some Caucasians on the other side of the street walking down the neighborhood. I live in the neighborhood, but they do not live in the neighborhood. They will stop me first and ask me why am I out or where I'm going at. And I will politely look over to them and say, but I live in the neighborhood. You stopping someone who's been in this neighborhood for over 20 years. You not once did you look across the street and ask them, are they in the neighborhood? And they don't live in the neighborhood. You feel where I'm coming with this at?
Racism alive and well.
Now I want to migrate here because I'm trying to get out Chirac. But I know it's Chirac in every city. Will I feel safe as a senior being here? Will I be able to say they protect and serve here without having to have that fear?
What is your question?
My question is that can I look for anything different from being here as far as with the law enforcement?
That's fair.
It's a great question. Thank you so much.
As a senior.
Go ahead.
So if I could just say, it's like Malcolm X said, anything south of the Canadian border is down south.
That's right.
and
That's
so
reality, Keith.
yeah, and I just want to say, I wish I could tell you that there was some city in America where everybody loved everybody and it was just respect all around and everybody was making money and everybody had a nice place to live. And, I wish it was such a place. I know we're all fighting for it, but I haven't found it. If you find it, let me know. The only thing is if you leave Chicago to come to Minneapolis, just know you're just trading one set of issues for another, and it's struggle, right? But I did want to go back and say thank you to Miss Sabrina because, the first time I ever really heard of Black people in struggle was the Montgomery bus boycott. I wasn't even born anywhere close to it. But, my mom is from Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. My dad is from Burke County, Georgia. I'm Southern on both sides, and so to me, we're all united. I mean, there's all of us from Minnesota. I'm not sure what Booker's roots are, but I think there's from Chicago, which means Mississippi. No, not really. Well, I know Tyrone is from Missouri, Spike's from Missouri, and that's the South. And so we're all in solidarity with y'all in Alabama is what I'm trying to say. And we believe in what you're doing. And thank you
Yeah.
for giving us some love, but we're giving it right back to you because we recognize your tremendous struggle, sister. So please keep up the good work and let us know how we can work together on more stuff.
Thank you.
There was a verdict rendered in this case, and Keith, you all did a fantastic job in terms of the whole process. And actually, you spoke this early on, but I'm going to kind of circle back again and ask the question. Guilty verdict, and Tyrone, you also spoke to this as well, but the Floyd family was at least compensated, at least as one settlement that I'm aware of. Is this over?
No, it's
over?
not. No, it's not. There's three
where's
more
it-
defendants.
Where's the community today, though? What would be the actual barometer of the community today if you were to sort of say, what's the status right now?
I'll let other people answer that, but if you ask me if the case is over, no, it is not over. In fact, there's a federal civil rights trial going on January 20th, and we have a March 8th date on the state charges. You know, I do think it'll be good for y'all to hear about this effort that Spike and Tyrone and them are leading in the community, because, you know, a lot of people are like, okay, well, we can't really do nothing about police brutality because we need the police to help us deal with this crime problem. And what Spike and these guys have done is this thing called 21 Days of Peace, where they have unarmed community intervention with neighborhood folks who just go to the hottest spots and they just sort of like sit in lawn chairs. And I don't know, Spike, you want to tell them about it?
Well, basically shut it down, change it from the drug dealing and the murder that's going on. And we get the information from the police department where are the worst spots. And that's where we send members of every church that wants to engage in 21 Days of Peace. It's not any different, Keith, and I'll say this that you didn't say. When you were a young man and Tyrone was a young man.
I'm still young.
It wasn't any, well, Tyrone can say that all he wants. He's a senior citizen. When he was a young man,
Your social security check's coming, brother. Don't worry about it.
well, here's what I'm saying. When he was a young man, the two of you helped me when I did gang summits all across America. And I was successful because of the great minds and the great heads in terms of their love for our people to save as many of those young men as we could. This is nothing but a repeat of what Tyrone and you gave back when I was doing that work. And we have to do it till it slows down. What I'm saying to people, Keith, all over the country, when that young man is laying there in a pool of blood, you have to ask yourself this question. Is that an African-American doctor? Is that an African-American teacher or lawyer or businessman? Who was that we just killed? What was his real potential? And that's what makes us go out there and save as many people as we can. I'm at turning point right now because I still believe save as many of these men as we can. I never come here expecting for all these men to listen to me. I come here to get 2, and I'll be back next week to get 2 more. So we're gonna keep 21 Days of Peace going in every area to slow down the homicide, to save as many of these young men as we can possibly save. And I'll say this also, Keith. I did 39 years of going in 3 prisons a week, not including the prisons and federal penitentiaries across the country. But the last penitentiary I went in, I went with Bobby, Joe, and you, Keith. And for the first time in my life, I seen all the men replaced with our children in a men's institution called Stillwater. So if we don't stand up, you were right there beside me, Keith. We don't stand up, we continue to fill up them penitentiaries with the children who are our future. So 21 Days of Peace is important. And it's important for these men in this room to hear this discussion because they have to play a role in how we move forward and survive. I think we lost our volume again.
Well, I think
Lost Jim.
Yeah.
You back in?
Were we supposed to go till 3:30?
Yeah, I think Jim dropped. I don't know who wants to take over the panel.
Maybe we could just do closing remarks since I think we'll go till 3:30. So I'll just be brief. Thank everybody for being here. the one most important part that I always say when we talk to human rights folks is the term human. We can never forget that. And as we move forward in law enforcement, just hold people accountable in them chief seats, right? Because I mean, personally, I just believe that a lot of problems we're having in this profession are leadership based, period. So be cautious of the person that's telling you a place is messed up when they're in charge, right? I mean, they hold those people accountable. So again, thank you very much. And I'll let the smarter people talk to me.
Thank you, Booker. I'm back here, folks. Let me move us to a different place here real quickly. I know our time is moving us pretty quickly. I want to also, again, invite our colleagues who are on the line with us. If there's a question, please speak up and be more than glad to have you take the floor with your question or your comment. One of the things that I guess I want to make sure that we do talk about is this idea that, and let me back up a second or two and just kind of go back to the previous question I was trying to really get to was, and maybe you spoke to that, and again, I have some technical difficulties on my end, but the point is that trying to get a feel for, again, if people on the line today who may be experiencing some of these same kinds of issues, or maybe not, how can we prepare those of us who work with our communities in our various locations across this country? I mean, what are the lessons learned? What should we be doing right now? Even though we don't have a crisis, we don't have anything right now, maybe facing us right now, but what should we do as human rights workers, human rights professionals, directors, commissioners? What are the kinds of things we ought to be doing right now? Just make real sure then that if such an incident should occur, to the extent anybody can be ready for crises, what should we be doing right now? Anybody?
So I'll start with saying that every community is going to have a crisis. You can't prevent it, but you can lessen the impact of it. One thing that we do in St. Paul in particular is all of our leaders, we meet once or twice a month together. I serve as president of the African American Leadership Council, which is made up of about 55 different Black folks from the community. But we have a direct partnership with the NAACP. We have a direct partnership with the Black Ministerial Alliance. I'm the only non-minister of the 30 churches that are involved. But so you can't wait till there's a crisis, they come together. So I'm telling Black folks across the country, establish somebody where you meet once or twice a month to build that trust, because you're going to have a crisis. But when you're unprepared, then you're going to have bad results. So I'm saying you've got to check your egos, get at the same table. And one thing that Spike and I say all the time is the Black church still has to be at the forefront of this. You can't do this work without the Black church. And the preachers still bring in other preachers, but there has to be a open line of communication between folks before it happens. It's going to happen, but if you're not prepared for it, things would have been a lot worse with George Floyd if Chief Arredondo did not have the relationship with Black leaders to call everybody the night before to be in his office at 8 o'clock the next morning. And so you must work together.
I got a couple things to say. I'm part of the Unity Community team that continue to go after the U.S. Department with the mandated police mediation. That team is made up of African Americans, Somali Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans, the gay community, because they get beat a lot, not killed a lot, and the mentally ill community. And I've recently asked Keith to stay close, so we got a lawmaker to help us rewrite the laws that will protect the citizens. And then I'll go a step further and say that the question he said, what do we do right now? These are civil rights people across the country listening to this telecast.
Yes.
Now look into your own rules, your own policies, And if your own rules and policies don't allow you to really fight and protect the people, then fight to get the power to do that. Also take a look at your city council. If they're not allowing you to do that, then fight to unseat those people and put people in that will allow the Civil Rights Department to actually represent people, the Human Rights Department to absolutely represent people. We live in a state where a phone call to those offices is a waste of time. But they need to come with the first charges. They need, if the police drop the ball, they need to continue to go on what they know is right. And then we got a real civil rights and a new human rights. In closing, I want to say this right in front of you. I pray to God that Booker, you run for chief. It ain't gonna be no one African-American and done. I'm telling you to your face. I pray to God you run for chief. You're the second highest ranking law enforcement officer in the state. Run for chief. I beg you if you were standing in front of me. We can't back up. We ain't going backwards. We want change. And I pleaded with Keith, help us with this change. Keith's got years of what police brutality looks like. Tyrone's got years of it. We need to put our heads together and stomp this out of this state.
Very good.
Other
That a
questions?
yes, that a yes, Booker?
You want me to sing James Brown's song, please, please?
You know what he also said, you know, Papa, it don't take no mess too. So you know, no, so I mean, you know, Lord will put me where he wants me, man. I mean, I do what I think, you know, coming home to be good, yeah. But you know, there's politics behind that and people pick who they want to pick. But you know, I mean, the Lord's gonna put me where he wants to put me. And you know, but on the other note, I'm honored that you would really say that to me, because I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but Spike and I started on that mediation committee back when it first started in 2002. I got my first police job in the backyard of Spike's house at a barbecue grill. This is when I got my first police job, on a phone call in the back of Spike's yard. So I mean, that just shows you in Minnesota, I know people talk about us, but one thing that people don't realize in Minnesota, I know the gentleman there was talking about safety. In Minnesota, we do have a community. We have a Black community. And that's something that, you know, that a lot of places don't have. And we're proud. We got a proud Black community. That doesn't mean we're perfect. That doesn't mean we all get along, but we have a community and we all respect each other. So thanks, Spike.
You raise a point there, Booker. I want to see if Tyrone remembers this, maybe does, and maybe Keith as well. And maybe we should have done this in the outset. Paint a picture for us demographically of what Minnesota, Twin Cities particularly looks like. What's the racial makeup and how do folks get along? You said you've got a community, but how do they really get along?
Which folks?
I mean, our demographics are, I mean, Minneapolis is probably a little higher than St. Paul. St. Paul is about 44% minority, about 18% Black. Minneapolis is a little higher than that. So we're not lacking Black folks or people of color. We're lacking commitment sometimes. This is a tireless fight that folks don't want to take on, but nobody's gonna give us anything. And so we have to work, and Booker said it, we have to work together. And we're in the best position we've been in a long time, with an attorney general who cares. We have a commissioner of public safety who cares. Booker's gonna be the next chief of police for Minneapolis. We're gonna take care of the politics. Booker will take care of the politics.
Amen.
But
please.
but we work together across both. To me, there is no St. Paul or Minneapolis. I go freely between the two. And you can't ever separate yourself from other Black folks, because it's not good for the community. And most of us around this, on this Zoom conference call, everybody got a job. Everybody doing well.
You got a job, you can tell me and help me?
No, not you. Everybody got a job but you. But my point is, there are people out there that don't have a job. The people that Keith talked about, who are in a tent, who are begging to make their rent payment. You know, there are people struggling. I say it all the time, no child born with a pistol in their hand. None. So if you check their environment where they come from, many of them don't have a chance. Go to any of your schools, and you'll see the next shooter. You'll see the next teenage pregnancy. So if we as a community, that old saying, it takes a village to raise a child, we don't even know what's on our own block. Most people, if you tell them, tell me who's on your block, from one corner to the next. So we've got to get back, as Spike says this all the time, we've got to get back to loving ourselves. Black people, we got to stop hating ourselves. And another thing Spike says all the time, if men stand up in our community, little boys will sit down. So the men got to stand up.
One of the things to the brother that's sitting there, the big picture for us, as Booker says, we have a community. The big picture is that Minnesota is Mississippi up north.
That's right.
And now, to be clear, 74 to 76% of all the mortgages belong to white people. All the people of color together don't make up 20%. To be clear, the average income for a white person last year was $62,000 to $63,000. The average income for a black was 27. This year, white is now 82, 83, and blacks are now less than 27. Minnesota also has the worst banking system towards black people in the entire country. They redline more than any other state. If you should make 150, you and your wife, you can't get a $40,000 loan if you're black. Of those banks, Wells Fargo treats us the worst. And I'd say this in closing, Mississippi is dirt poor. Mississippi has more blacks graduate than Minnesota. Mississippi has more blacks go to college than Minnesota. Mississippi has more blacks graduate from college than Minnesota. Mississippi has more mortgages than Minnesota. And Mississippi has more black-owned businesses than Minnesota. Mississippi has more black elected officials than Minnesota. So systemic racism here is the #1 problem with the state, which also leads over in what's wrong with everything else.
Where's the white community? Where's the white community in this discussion? We have not said anything about them at all.
Doing well. Matter of fact, for years when Keith was going to school, all the way back then, Minnesota was the 4th richest city in the entire world. And they've stayed there for generations because every corporation they got made another corporation. Even if you look at Dayton's, they made the Dayton stores. Then they made the malls all over the city. Then they made Payless. Then they made Target. Every corporation we got does that. General Mills made all the cereal, all the cookies, all the cakes. Then they made the shirt with the alligator on the front. Then they made the Hasbro train. Then they made Red Lobster. Then they made Olive Garden. Every one of our companies build like that. They filthy rich. They just ain't giving back and helping new people of color.
Is there an opportunity for becoming that beloved community that Dr. King talked about?
Where at?
Jim, I don't think it will be in our
I
lifetime.
want to go.
I don't think it'll be in our lifetime, Jim.
Take me there.
And it's sad that it won't happen, but we have to keep marching up that road. We can't stop. And so, again, we have to take care of our own communities. We have to be vigilant about this. People have paved the way for us, the Dr. Kings and countless others paved the way for us not to be afraid to do what we need to do. But again, I challenge all the agencies on here, be visible in your community. Whenever there's a murder of somebody black, you should be at the forefront. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Governor, move over. I'm just gonna stand shoulder to shoulder. But you need to be visible in your community. Your community has to trust you. The community needs you more than just filing a complaint of discrimination.
You know, one thing I would recommend as we begin to wrap the call is
Yes.
that, you know, we have a lot of states on here. I think there's probably some Floridians. We know there's some Alabamans,
Yes.
probably some Pennsylvanians, probably some Marylanders. There's folks from all over.
That's right.
Please get a hold of your state attorney general and don't wait for a crisis. Talk to him now, talk to him now and say, look, when a crisis comes up, and then tell him stuff like you need to convene law enforcement and civil rights community together to talk about how we're gonna solve these problems, whether it's housing, policing, prison. I mean, and let me also say, you know, you guys are listening to us, we're from Minnesota, but you know, Jimmy Lee Jackson is from Alabama, and he was murdered by the police, which sparked, you know, the march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you know, that started that whole thing, led to the Voting Rights Act. I think in Pennsylvania, when the Philadelphia police dropped the bomb on the MOVE organization, that was police brutality. You know, I don't know if there's any Pennsylvanians on the call, but wow, you know, that was crazy. Floridians, I mean, there's a lot of cases in Florida, but one in particular is Trayvon Martin. Anybody from Florida on the call? I mean, you know, bottom line is, you know, this, you could mark this current movement that we're in to right there. And of course, Jim, you're from Maryland, right? And
Right.
that's where Freddie Gray was murdered there in Baltimore.
Correct.
And so all of us are in this. We're all in this, right? And so we need to think about how we're going to do something about it creatively. You know, Booker's supervisor and I co-led a task force. Booker played a very important role in that, where we got together outside of a crisis and said, let's talk about, we don't need a crisis to try to figure out the problem, you know. So we worked on some things, and then of course, you know, you've heard about different things we've been working on, but I would just say, reach out to your AG. You got one great idea, get internal affairs out of the department and in a separate department. That's a actionable item right there, right? And talk to your state AG about taking over these criminal prosecutions when some of the county attorneys don't hold the trust of the community, right? Your AG can step in and do it. Georgia AG, Attorney General Carr, any Georgians on the call? That the AG's office led the prosecution of the people who murdered Ahmaud Arbery. So that's a thing that you can rely on. But I would say that this call is doing something about the problem we're dealing with. Last thing I want to say, and I'll just be quiet from here. There's a woman who is a real hero. I wish more people knew about her. Her name is Carrie L. Horn. She was a police officer. And back in 2006, she and her partner went to go make an arrest. And she made her arrest, you know, clicked the cuffs on the guy and all. But her partner started beating the crap out of this dude when he was in custody and not resisting. She tries to stop him from doing it. He punches her in the face. And then you're thinking, oh, well, you know, that guy probably got in trouble. No, she got in trouble. He said she interfered. She ended up getting fired, lost her pension, had to bring a lawsuit just to get her pension back. My point is, you know, good officers, there's a lot of people who want to do policing right, but they have to work next to the thumpers and the bullies and the racists, and they shouldn't have to. You'd have a lot more people wanting to be in the police department if they did not have to deal with these people who basically escalate problems for them. And I think that's something to think about. When we think about police community relations, we usually think, oh, the police are all brutal. They're not all brutal. Some even try to stand up and do the right thing, but the institution shuts them down and shuts them up a lot of times. We need to be on their side. And, you know, and I think this is some ground that we need to dig into a little bit. It's I have to ask y'all for apologies because I have to leave. I will tell you that, Booker, you have been a police chief. You're qualified to be the chief of, say, in Minneapolis, man. You know, why not?
Please.
You know, you're qualified and you're a listener and you're a truth teller and you don't back down and you know, I think you are more than qualified, brother. So get your application ready, brother, because you got a lot of people who want to see you do that job.
I got a
And
big
with that-
question for you, Keith.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Before you go,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stir the pot one time.
All right.
What would you have to do to be the first state attorney general to force the police department to open those files and take those people to court?
Well, let me tell you, brother, right now, The Minneapolis Police Department is under investigation by the state of Minnesota, and the lawyers doing the work are from my office. And that's happening as we speak. So
That's what I'm talking about.
yeah, because it's, Spike, if you really want to like get freaked out, read about that Terrence Franklin case. That really is something. Anyway, I'll leave that right there. But
I got a question for them.
Let me just do this. We are at our ending time here, and I
oh,
apologize.
it's time to go anyway. Okay.
Yeah, you right on time, Keith. Let me again thank you all for this fascinating, I hope very provocative conversation for our members of our organization. You've given us enormous amount of ideas. I hope people were jotting down notes. I know that I was, and trying to kind of figure out what we can do in our own communities. This has been extremely helpful. Please, to my colleagues, join me in thanking again the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison. We want to thank also the mayor of certainly Northeast, I think I've got that right, Minnesota, Spike Moss, also the next police chief, and I'm going to say to Dr. Booker, Dr. Booker Hodges, I should get his full name. We will be. I'm a man of faith, so I'm a follow your lead in terms of that. And so if that's where God would have you be, I'm certainly going to be praying for that. And then to my colleague, who I just am so grateful that we crossed paths so many years ago. You've been an inspiration and just an invaluable light, L-I-G-H-T, in my life, Tyrone Terrell. So thank you all very, very much for this very, very meaningful dialogue.